you ever stared at a comprehension question and thought, what does that even mean? Well, you're not alone. Whether it's discuss, comment, or evaluate, these words can feel like exam traps designed by evil geniuses. But not on my watch. Hey fabulous humans, welcome back to English with Miss B, where we tackle all those niggly sections that trip students up in assessments and exams. Today, we're cracking the code on comprehension. So grab your pens, your highlighters, and maybe a stress ball, because by the end of this video, comprehension will feel a whole lot less scary. All right, people, today's tutorial is all about how to crush comprehension questions like a pro. Let's get right into it. All right, let's be honest. Comprehension isn't about how well you can read. I mean, we have prepared reading and unprepared reading assessments for that. It's about how well you can think about what you've read. Examiners aren't checking if you can copy and paste from the text. Well, not in English home language at least. They're testing if you can understand, interpret, apply, and maybe even judge what you've read. It's basically intellectual CrossFit. Now, grade 12s. I can hear you laughing. Okay, so my learners know that fitness isn't my thing, but intellectual CrossFit, now hey, that is my jam. All right, so today I'm going to show you how to read smarter, not harder, how to decode those question types like a pro, and how to get every mark you deserve without having to write a novel to do it. So here's an overview of our tutorial for today. The first thing we'll be tackling is how to utilize your reading time, those precious 10 minutes before your paper actually commences, and then how to manage your time throughout paper 1. And obviously, specifically, we'll talk about how to make every second of your comprehension time count. We're then going to decode the blueprint used by most examiners. Yep, we're going to be putting Bloom's taxonomy under the microscope. I mean, let's face it, you can't answer questions without understanding their ins and outs or the requirements for each type of question in the examiner's inventory. Next, we're going to level up on our answering tools and strategies. All the merch you can carry into this comprehension game is yours, just at the cost of listening attentively to this tutorial. And if you're especially attentive, I might throw in a cheat sheet or two to help you ace your exams. Lastly, we're going to render our answers with proper proofreading and the final checks. So at the risk of sounding really dramatic, I have to say that your reading time is critical. It's absolutely crucial that you utilize your reading time properly. So before reading time commences, please make sure you've wished everybody all the best, and obviously I want you to offer your salutations to the powers that be way before reading time commences, because the moment your invigilator says, okay everybody, you may start reading, you're going to utilize every second of your time wisely. Okay, now it should take you about 2 minutes to page through the entire question paper and the insert, of course. Make sure you have all the pages, the questions as indicated on the cover page. Please read through the instructions carefully. But that leaves you with 8 critical minutes to get a jump start on question 1. So here's the game plan. You're going to read the title. What does it convey? Are there any interesting literary devices or writing techniques that jump out at you? Then, who is the author and what can we glean about the author's position on the topic? All right. Next, read the questions along with the mark allocations for each question. So decide if it's a lot or a hot. We'll talk more about lots and hots when we get to Bloom's taxonomy in a bit. Lastly, read the passage intentionally and for meaning. By the end of your reading time, you should have the gist and basic information of who, what, when, where, why, and how pertaining to the passage. So just a quick note, guys, most learners lose marks due to a lack of time management. So please keep one eye on the clock at all times. Now I'm going to break down your strategy a little further in a typical paper 1, you're going to need to earn 100 marks in the space of 3 hours. And that works out to about 108 seconds per mark. So doing a bit of quick maths there, you'll discover that your comprehension section will have to be completed with the proofreading and touch-ups and the works in the space of 45 minutes. Okay, and that is being quite generous. If you can hack it in 40 minutes, that's even better. FYI, the rest of your time management strategy should look something like this. So your summary carries 10 marks, so you should not utilize more than 18 minutes to complete the summary. So those of you who are in the habit of writing a draft first and editing it before writing out a final summary, you're not going to have that much of time to do that. In fact, I don't recommend you do that at all. So moving on to the next section, your scene poetry carries 15 marks, which means that you have 27 minutes approximately to get that done and dusted. Unseen poetry also carries 15 marks, so another 27 minutes should go on that question. Now, visual literacy is a whole other beast, and it carries approximately 25 marks, but sometimes the examiner might split the marks a little differently between visual literacy and the next section, which is your language and editing. So language and editing might carry 12 marks, or the split is not always 25-10. So 45 minutes should be allocated towards your visual literacy section. Please be aware of the numbering technique that the examiner has decided to use this time around. I think it's quite learner friendly, where all the text throughout the paper will be numbered according to the question, and the letter belongs to the sequence of the resource. So if there are 2 resources in question 1, it'll be 1A for the first resource and 1B for the second resource. The same with your visual lit question. It'll be 5A, 5B, 5C, 5D, and so forth and so on, so that you understand that there are this many resources that you need to answer questions on in this section, because lots of learners tend to omit certain resources. They don't answer questions on certain ads and cartoons. So we're hoping to eliminate that problem this year. Next, your language and editing section. Now, most people don't even allocate time. They don't get to finish the paper. They don't get to reach this question. Please, you should spend the last 18 minutes of your paper reading through the rest of your answers, but also completing your language and editing section. We should tackle comprehension in a step-by-step fashion, because comprehension is not about guesswork. There is a system in place. But before I walk you through that system, though, I want to let you in on a little secret, and that is Bloom's verbs. Now, these are the question words in your examiner's inventory, and they are structured into levels from your HOTS, which are your higher order thinking skills, to your LOTS, which are your lower order thinking skills. In a typical exam paper, 60% of your questions will test your lower order thinking skills, and only 40% of your paper will test your higher order thinking skills. So, to do justice to each type of question in your exam, in general and in the comprehension specifically, I recommend that you spend some time studying this slide and the exam vocabulary cheat sheet that I've included. Now, the levels are as follows. The first level is your remembering level. Second, the questions that test your recall ability. And then you have the questions that test your understanding. Next, you have the questions that require you to apply what you've learned or what you've read. The next level tests your ability to analyze and engage with the text in a deeper way. Next, you will have to apply your levels of discernment, your ability to process information, to evaluate what you've read or a person's opinion or perspective. You'll also be required to create something from what you've read. So why should you know your Bloom's verbs? It's not like you're going to go out and set an exam paper or something, but it is important for you to know your Bloom's verbs simply because it will enable you to classify and categorize the questions in your comprehension component. And once you familiarize yourself with the requirements for each level, decoding comprehension questions becomes really simple. So I came across this mnemonic for the levels. So remember, level 1 is remember, level 2 is understanding, level 3 application, level 4 analysis, level 5 synthesis, level 6 evaluation, and level 7 create. And your mnemonic is remember, under apples, ants are such evil critters. It's kind of useful and a bit kooky. Next up, we tackle answering tools and strategies. So the following tools and strategies are going to really help you level up your comprehension game. And just a little disclaimer, these slides will look a bit different from the rest of the slide deck in this tutorial. Is because I've taken it from my classroom decor and my theme is the grammar police. Also, a huge shout out to Mr. Mark Hubbard, from whom I borrowed some of the pro tips, and well, I've adapted it from the material he has in his classroom because I find them really effective. Now, the first thing you're going to do is obviously isolate the keywords, identify where the questions have been scaffolded, because your comprehension questions will consist of layers of questioning. So identify the different layers, separate them if you must. I prefer using a forward slash. I like to draw a forward slash in pencil to separate the various aspects of each question. The most important thing that I want you to bear in mind is every answer in your comprehension section should be contextualized. That means you need to align your answer exactly with what is happening in the passage. Don't create general answers that you haven't linked to the passage directly. So, getting to the pro tips to get you on track. When providing evidence, be sure to reference, paraphrase, or quote to support your stance, but always integrate the evidence into your comment with words like when for literature, or in paragraph whatever, or in the passage. Evidence without an argument is evidence of nothing. Pro tip 2. If you need to prove somebody is an example of something, first define the term, then measure that person or thing against the definition. You can also adapt this strategy to those "to what extent" questions. Really effective. I like this one. Pro tip 3. When. As mentioned earlier, to comment on any piece of evidence, begin with the word when, then the reference or quote, then add a comma, and your comment thereafter. Pro tip 4. The comparison question. Answering the comparison question is like comparing apples and oranges. So you're not just listing facts about apples and then facts about oranges. You're being asked what's the same, what's different, and why does it even matter? So let's take this example here. Apples are crisp and sweet, while oranges are juicy and tangy. Now, you're kind of comparing them, but it's more of a description. It's not really a proper comparison. If you were to say something like, both apples and oranges are fruits, but apples are usually eaten raw, while oranges are often juiced. This affects how they are used in daily life. Now you're comparing. So, in your English paper, you'll be asked to compare two poems, texts, or characters. So when that happens, don't treat them like separate shopping lists. Instead, put them side by side. Okay? What are their similarities? In terms of apples and oranges, both are fruits, both are healthy. In terms of their differences, they have different tastes, they have different textures, and they also have different uses. So what is the effect or purpose of each? Now here, when it comes to your texts and your characters and your poems, you need to answer the question, why did the author make them so different? Or why did each author write so differently? Right? Here's a top tip. Use comparative words like both, however, whereas, similarly. This indicates that you are making a comparison. Pro tip 5, the little brother strategy. To show your advanced understanding, it's recommended that you do something that might seem somewhat counterintuitive at the outset. But the best way that you can show your understanding is to imagine explaining the text to your little brother, who may not understand what they've read. Now, this is called the little brother strategy. Just think about how your maths and physics teachers, I mean, they are such geniuses. They've got really high IQs, but they are able to explain difficult concepts in ways that you would be able to understand. So you need to do the same to prove that you've understood the text. Pro tip 6, elaboration. You know when you've said everything in one sentence, but the question carries 3 marks? Yeah. Why not add to your brief explanation with an example, well, a relevant example, or a further explanation of your stance or the text. Be sure to use an example that has a direct bearing on the context of the passage. There's nothing worse than an underdeveloped answer, but at the same time, it's really tedious and frustrating when we come across an answer that's 3/4 of a page in length, but you've actually said absolutely nothing, and we've waded through all that text looking for, a needle in a haystack and coming up with nothing. How to answer comprehension questions like a top learner. IEB English Home Language Paper 1. Remember, the marker is not testing if you can copy the text. They are checking if you have understood it and can apply that understanding clearly and logically. Alright, here is a foolproof 10-step strategy to help you level up your comprehension game. Step 1. Circle or highlight keywords. Always start by highlighting the command word, like discuss, explain, or suggest. Then look for topic words and check how many marks the question is worth. The mark allocation will indicate to you how much of time and effort you need to put into that answer. So if it's a 2-mark question, please don't write a 10-line response. Step 2. Break down the question into smaller questions. Treat it like a mini checklist of smaller questions. Treat every comprehension question like it's a short checklist. And here's an example for you. Comment on how the writer's diction reinforces his tone. Now, this seemingly simple question can be broken down further into 3 separate questions. But first, we need to identify the keywords. The command word is comment. Now, comment is not a simple command word. There are 3 possible permutations to that one command word. You'll find more information on this in the linked in the description box below. I've got a little cheat sheet for you on question words. The next keyword is diction, and the last one is tone. Now, you need to be able to identify, you've got to have the vocabulary to identify the diction in the paragraph, but you must also quote the exact word or words that you're referring to, and you've got to explain the connotative meaning of the words. What does the writer mean? Why have they selected that word? Has it something to do with the degrees of comparison, for instance? Have they chosen a stronger word over a weaker word? And why have they done so? All right, especially the connotative meaning is important here. Then, what is the tone of the paragraph? Now, you need to be able to have the vocabulary. You need to be able to explain, identify the tone correctly. Now, I've got a lovely slide presentation on tone, and at the end of that presentation, there are about 150 tone words. So, yeah, this is a huge deal. You need to be able to use your words accurately. Now, the last part is something that most learners leave out of their answer, and that is the reason why the answer seems underdeveloped. You have to be able to explain how the word choices or diction help to create that tone that is quite obvious in the paragraph or in the sentence. Step 3. Use the words of the question in your answer. Now, be cautious about this because some learners take this to heart, but they don't follow through, and they simply rephrase the question without furnishing the rest of the answer, without completing the answer. So please don't do that either. Now, if the question is, explain why the title is effective, Please don't say something like, yes, because. Instead, say something more effective, like, the title is effective because it immediately makes the reader consider blah, 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 blah. Please complete that answer. This keeps your answer focused and helps you to avoid off-topic writing. Right? It keeps you on point, but it also saves the marker time as well. Step 4, define each part of the question. I know the slide says internally or aloud in class, but since you're going to be in the exam room, rather just keep it to yourself. Next, ask the following question. What does the command word mean here? Okay, whatever the command word is, try to understand what is being asked of you. What do I need to explain here? So how should you craft the actual answer? What aspect is the examiner focusing on? Is it a tone question? Is it a diction question? Is it a question based on the theme? Step 5, provide evidence, which means you got to quote, but don't overquote. That's another issue that could lead to all kinds of problems. Rather, use short, direct quotes from the passage that prove your point. But remember, your point is more important, and it's important to craft that point and use the evidence, use the quote as evidence. Keep your quotes brief, no more than 7 words at the most, unless like it's the most critical point in the entire comprehension passage. Don't just drop the quote though, lead into it. Here's an example. The word shocking accusation shows the writer's tone of disbelief. So directly link your quote to your point or your explanation. It's really important. Step 6. Explain the quote in your own words. Your quote is your proof and your explanation is the analysis. So ask the question, what does this quote show? Why did the writer choose this word? How does it support the main point? And use this format often. Now, I want you to memorize this and use it wherever you can. Point, quote, explanation. 7. Use the mark allocation to guide the length of your answer. So the marks should give you an indication of the expected length. For those 2-mark questions, 2 to 3 concise, relevant sentences are all you require. For those 3-mark questions, 3 to 4 sentences with a quote would be sufficient. And for those 4-mark questions, 4 to 5 well-explained sentences with 1 to 2 pieces of evidence would be sufficient. Now remember, if your answer is too short, you risk missing ideas. If it's too long, you're going to waste time and you're possibly going to veer off topic. 8. Understanding the message or the theme before crafting your answer. Always ask yourself, what is this writer really saying? What is the vibe? Is it friendly, sarcastic, angry? Because this changes everything. So before answering, you should ask a few relevant questions. What is the overall point of this paragraph or text? What tone is the writer using here? And bear in mind that the writer's tone may alter throughout the text. What attitude does the writer have towards the topic? This is going to help you focus and catch all those subtleties in tone, irony, bias, propaganda, etc. 9. Apply both theory and practice. Use your knowledge of the following. Pronouns. Has the writer used inclusive pronouns or exclusive pronouns? There's always this us versus them kind of scenario. Diction. That refers to the word choices of the writer. Have they used formal words, harsh words, emotive words? Have they used propaganda? Pay attention to sentence structure. Have they used short, sharp sentences versus long, rambling ones? Punctuation. Look out for things like caesura, ellipses, dashes. Has the writer used punctuation to create a specific emphasis? Paragraph length and placement are also things that you should pay attention to. Now, these are often the kinds of things that you need to look out for in those positioning questions or the questions on effectiveness. 10. Put yourself in the marker's shoes. Read your answer from their perspective and ask the following questions. Now, if I read this answer, would I be convinced that the learner understood the passage? Does the learner show insight, or are they just restating what's already there? Now, for these effectiveness questions, I want you to ponder on the following. What technique is being used here? What is being emphasized? Who is the audience? And how would the reader respond? Hey, are you guys still with me? If your brain is starting to melt, take a deep breath. Triangle breaths, anyone? In through the nose. Hold. Out through the mouth. You're doing great. Comment below with the weirdest comprehension question you've ever faced. I might break it down in the next video. Now, I want to talk about where learners lose marks unnecessarily. They write too much or too little. They ignore the command word. They quote without explaining. They go off topic because they didn't understand the question. Don't be that student, but be the one who checks every box. Now, here's a quick answer checklist for you. Decide whether you've answered every part of the question. Check it. Tick it off. Did I use a quote? Because it's important to include quotes. Did I explain that quote? Did I stay relevant and focused? Last golden rule, proofread before you move on, okay? Also remember the length of your answer would be dictated by the mark allocation. So just 1 minute per answer could save you from silly grammar errors or missing out on a mark because of bad phrasing or misnumbering, especially in IEB exams where clarity and precision matter. Congratulations, everybody. I think we can safely say that we have leveled up with our pro tips and strategies, and our comprehension game is pretty strong. But let's put it to the test. We're going to work through the comprehension from the 2024 Final IEB paper. Here is the comprehension passage taken from the insert, Rethinking the Purpose of University Education by Pedro Tabansky. Paragraph 1. Most philosophers of education in the past century and a half would agree that education should be the practice of freedom. Education should nurture the ability to wisely decide how we want to shape our lives, and it should promote human independence. Paragraph 2. Among these scholars are some of the most influential theorists of the 20th century, the American John Dewey, Brazilian Paulo Freire, and Indian Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore. Yes, there is little evidence that their views have played any significance in shaping the global education sector. Paragraph 3. If these scholars are correct, universities and educational institutions do not always understand what they're doing. It is a shocking accusation leveled at the higher education sector. After all, education institutions are in the business, or should be, of fostering understanding. Paragraph 4. I have for many years been trying to make sense of education's purpose and wondering why there is such a difference between what scholars of education have been telling us and what actually happens in the classroom. These authors believe that education should help to shape well-adjusted individuals who can contribute to the common good, as opposed merely to lending a hand to the status quo. Merely lending a hand distorts independence. Paragraph 5. Dewey thought that education should promote intelligent growth. In Dewey's own words, impulses and desires are not ordered by intelligence and are under the control of accidental circumstances. A person whose conduct is controlled in this way has the illusion of freedom. Actually, he is directed by forces over which he has no command. Paragraph 6. An educated person can adapt to life's challenges by critically and sensitively engaging with what is given. The alternative is what Dewey describes as someone whose conduct is controlled by forces over which he has no command and hence lacks freedom. This is a person who is unable to develop a proper understanding of the forces that undermine freedom. Paragraph 7. Sadly, it is this sort of existence that very many universities promote. Universities aim to produce competent professionals rather than individuals who are able to adapt to life's challenges and understand the forces that affect their freedom. Paragraph 8. Universities follow on from high school by training students to be accepting robots. Students are trained to apply their intelligence in specific spheres of life and do not ask too many questions beyond their narrow scope of involvement. This sort of narrow thinking lacks the independence of the critical mind, a mind able to stand back, consider, and influence action. It is this approach that the philosopher and linguist Noam Chomsky describes in an interview when speaking about the contrast between indoctrination and genuine education. Paragraph 9. In an interview which forms part of the documentary, The Lottery of Birth, Jeff Schmidt, a physicist and the author, says, "Professionals are deliberately produced to be intellectually and politically subordinate." He illustrates this idea with the story of two young nuclear weapons designers working in a laboratory. When asked by a journalist was the worst part of their job, they responded that it was dealing with unstable computers lacking sufficient capacity. They were not, it seems, able to consider the higher purposes of the weapons they were creating. They were blindly serving, and the scope of their concerns was subordinated to the aims of others in power, meaning their employers. Paragraph 10. There are ways in which this approach to education can be challenged. At the Alan Gray Center for Leadership Ethics, we have developed a program called Linteto Zobomi, which is isiXhosa for Conversations About Life. It aims to complement the current university offering by fostering the educational ideas presented by these scholars. Service learning activities are a core part of the program. Students are encouraged to take the course only if they are interested in understanding how your life, including your inner life, is formed by the world you inhabit. Paragraph 11. Is it working? I hope so, but the growth we aim to foster is hard to measure. Paragraph 12. What I can say, however, is that the effect of such programs at any university would be far greater if there was more institutional buy-in than there is currently. Paragraph 13. The idea that education is the practice of freedom cannot be separated from the idea that education should aim to equip students to engage critically and creatively with reality, to transform it for the better. Alright, so if you haven't downloaded the paper as yet, please do so and work through the paper before going through the rest of this tutorial. It's important that you answer it for yourselves first. So, but those of you who have tackled this past paper, you can press on with this tutorial. So we're going to break down the questions and look at the various answering techniques that you could have applied had this been your final paper. So question 1, comprehension, refer to text 1 on pages 1 and 2 of the insert, entitled Rethinking the Purpose of University Education by Pedro Tabansky, and then answer the questions that follow. So getting into question 1, 1.1, refer to the title, discuss how the writer's use of rethinking highlights his intention. Now notice that I've already isolated some of the key words here, and you must always highlight the mark allocation. I did not highlight the word discuss, although that is the command word for this question. So look at the word rethinking. Now, obviously, we need to look at the diction, and this is a diction question linked to the writer's intention. So they've isolated the word that they want you to focus on, and they want you to link your answer regarding the word, the discussion surrounding the word rethinking, to the writer's intention. So you must link your discussion on the diction to the author's intention. Now, loads of learners would discuss the word rethinking without linking it to the writer's intention. Alternately, some learners would speak about the writer's intention in vague terms without linking it to the specific word provided in the question. So please be mindful of these things. And discuss is, if you go back to Bloom's taxonomy, discuss can be found in level 2 of the Bloom's, that little light bulb that was in that Bloom's slide. Will discuss features in the level 2 section, which is understanding. So before I actually reveal what the answer is, bear in mind that I've taken this answer and all the other answers from the marking memo and marking guidelines. So some of the answers may appear to be rather lengthy, and that's because the examiner has taken various viewpoints and various approaches that you might use as that learners might use to tackle the question. They've also provided guidelines for the markers. So I've included the entire memo here. So just remember that because this is a 2-mark question, your answer, the length of your answer should not exceed 3 sentences. But we're going to go over the marker's expectations, the examiner's expectations here. The use of the word rethinking in the title, rethinking the purpose of university education, serves to emphasize the writer's intention to prompt critical reflection and reconsideration of the established ideas and practices surrounding university education. So they went with the intention first. They led with the intention. Remember, we had the keywords. We've isolated the keywords, and intention was the main keyword, but we're going to use the word rethinking as part of the diction portion of our answer. Now, when you have to define a word, please make sure that you define the word in general if you must, but more importantly, you need to define the word in terms of the context of the passage. So let's look at this part of the answer. Rethinking implies an invitation to examine and evaluate existing notions about the purpose of university education. So they were really specific in defining the word rethinking. It suggests, so then they go on to explain the writer's use of the word. It suggests that the topic is open to reinterpretation and that there may be alternative viewpoints or approaches worth considering. The term rethinking conveys a sense of forward thinking and innovation. The writer's intention suggests a desire or willingness to explore new ideas, methodologies, and objectives for university education. Additionally, the writer intends to encourage readers to engage in a dialogue, the purpose of university education. It suggests that this is not a closed conversation, but rather an ongoing discourse where diverse perspectives are valued and where there is room for exploration and debate. Candidates need to consider the meaning of the word rethinking in the context of the title of the article. Candidates also need to link the writer's use of rethinking to his intention. Let's review the answering technique for this type of question. For questions on diction, your answer should include discussion on the writer's intention based on what is emphasized. Then, assess the intended impact on the audience. 1.2. Refer to paragraph 1. Now, you will be referred to specific paragraphs, and of course, you will need to focus on what's happening in that paragraph in order to do justice to that question. However, the wider context of the passage should be like an app, like a background app in your mind at all times. So, 1.2.1, explain in your words what the writer means by education should be the practice of freedom, and this question carries 2 marks. I have isolated explain and means as your keywords here. Explain is a level 2 question word and it tests your understanding. 1.2.2, correct the split infinitive in paragraph 1 and that carries 1 mark. Now you will get a few language in context questions throughout your exam paper and also in your comprehension section. Now, the correction of errors is a level 3 question, meaning it's an application question. So even though it carries 1 mark, it is a higher level of questioning. Let's get into the memo for that question. So 1.2.1, the writer sees the purpose of education to facilitate freedom and autonomy for individuals. He believes that education should empower people to make informed choices about how they want to live their lives and should encourage independence. The writer's use of practice of freedom links to his understanding that access to education should allow people to develop these skills. So you will need to contextualize your answer and specify clearly what you mean. For 1.2.2, the split infinitive in paragraph 1 is, now you must identify it and then you have to be able to correct it. To wisely decide. It can be corrected to decide wisely. Now remember what a split infinitive is, right? To and the verb should never be split by any other word in the sentence in the middle of it. So the word wisely has split that infinitive. So the correct answer, so the infinitive is to decide. That's the infinitive. And there shouldn't be any words in between that. But you knew that, right? I was just checking. Moving on to 1.3. Refer to the following from paragraph 2. Yet there is global education sector. Suggest how the use of yet positions the reader to view the writer's argument for 3 marks. So these positioning questions are a bit tricky, and I want you to go back to our strategy number 9, which is on slide 27 of this particular slide deck. Looking at the memo then, the use of yet in this context positions the reader to view the writer's argument with a sense of contrast or contradiction. It indicates that despite the influential status of scholars like Dewey, Freire and Tagore in the field of education, there is a lack of evidence showing that their views have had a significant impact on shaping the global education sector. Candidates must link the writer's use of yet to the argument. Candidates who do not explicitly link the use of yet to the contrasting argument cannot achieve more than 2 marks. So it's important to understand the marking guidelines. And I'm hoping that in practicing this paper, you should go through at least 5 past exam papers in order to fully prepare, because I want you to analyze the memos and the marking guidelines so that you have a better understanding of how your papers would be marked. Moving on to 1.4, refer to paragraph 3. Comment on how the diction used in this paragraph reinforces the writer's tone for 3 marks. Comment is a level 4 or analysis question. However, if the comment requires you to make a judgment, it becomes an evaluation level question or a level 5 question. Moving on to 1.4. The diction used in paragraph 3 reinforces the writer's tone of criticism and disbelief. Words and phrases such as shocking accusation leveled and do not always understand carry negative connotations and suggest a sense of astonishment and disappointment. Additionally, the use of after all implies a sense of expectation that educational institutions should fulfill their intended purpose, further highlighting the writer's critical stance. Overall, the choice of words in this paragraph contributes to a tone of skepticism and dissatisfaction with the higher education sector's perceived shortcomings. Quite a mouthful there, but candidates must refer to the meaning of the diction they select to show how it links to tone. Candidates must make explicit reference to tone words. Candidates who merely list diction without explaining how it reinforces the writer's tone cannot achieve more than 1 mark. So the examiner was pretty specific about the mark allocation there. 1.5. Discuss what is conveyed about the writer's approach to education in paragraph 4 for 2 marks. Now, bear in mind that the word discuss is a level 2 question word according to Bloom's taxonomy. Moving on to the model answer, as you can see, it's a rather lengthy answer, but as long as you have you've covered the aspects that I've highlighted here in this answer, you should be just fine. You should obtain your 2 marks. The writer has been deeply engaged in understanding the purpose of education for many years. He expresses a sense of puzzlement about the disparity between the ideals presented by scholars of education and the realities observed in the classroom. The writer's emphasis on education's role in shaping well-adjusted individuals who can contribute to the common good suggests a commitment to a more holistic view of education beyond merely academic or vocational outcomes. The writer's rejection of merely lending a hand to the status quo in favor of promoting independence underscores the scholar's belief in the transformative potential of education. This suggests that the writer's approach to education, which is similar to that of the scholars of education, is rooted in a desire for meaningful societal change and empowerment rather than passive acceptance of existing structures or norms. That was quite a mouthful. Moving on to 1.6. Refer to paragraphs 5 and 6. Explain why the illusion of freedom in the context of education can be considered negative for 2 marks. So explain, context, and negative are your key words in this question. And obviously, the word explain, the command word explain, is a level 2 question. And here is your answer. The illusion of freedom highlights the danger of a lack of critical thinking and intellectual engagement. If students are not taught to critically analyze and understand the factors influencing their decisions and behaviors, they may mistakenly believe they are making free choices when in fact their actions are determined by external forces such as societal norms, peer pressure, or propaganda. This illusion of freedom is negative because it prevents individuals from developing true autonomy and independence. Without the ability to critically engage with their environment and understand the underlying forces shaping their lives, individuals cannot exercise genuine freedom. Instead, they remain passive recipients of influences they do not fully comprehend, undermining their capacity for self-directed action and responsible decision-making. Now, please bear in mind, boys and girls, that as long as you have the key words and the key concepts mentioned here in this answer, you will obtain your full marks. 1.7. Refer to paragraphs 7 and 8. Critically discuss the writer's attitude towards secondary and tertiary education for 3 marks. Now, critically discuss signals a level 4 question of analysis. So you're going to have to unpack your answer quite carefully and logically here. And here is the answer. The writer is critical towards both secondary and tertiary education systems, suggesting that they prioritize producing competent professionals over fostering critical thinking and independence. The writer argues that universities follow on from high school by training students to be accepting robots, focusing on narrow specialization rather than encouraging students to ask questions and think critically beyond their immediate scope of involvement. The writer suggests that this approach results in students lacking the independence of the critical mind, which is essential for standing back, considering, and influencing action. They cite Noam Chomsky's contrast between indoctrination and genuine education, implying that the current education system tends more towards indoctrination by stifling curiosity and critical inquiry. The writer's use of sadly highlights his critical attitude. He highlights the fact that students are not able to ask too many questions beyond their narrow scope of involvement, citing this as an example of narrow thinking. For full marks, candidates must refer to the writer's attitude and provide a critical discussion. So there you have it. Moving on to question 1.8. Argue how the view expressed by Jeff Schmidt in paragraph 9 is supported by the story in the same paragraph for 3 marks. Now, an argue question requires for you to do a bit of synthesis, and therefore this is a level 6 question. Obviously, when it comes to higher order questions, you are expected to create a higher order answer. So here's the model answer. Jeff Schmidt suggests that certain educational and professional systems are designed in a way that discourages critical thinking and independent judgment among professionals. The story of the young nuclear weapons designers working in a laboratory demonstrates how professionals can become intellectually subordinate to the aims of others in power, such as their employers. The nuclear weapons designers, when asked about the worst part of their job, expressed frustration with technical issues related to the computers they use, rather than engaging with the ethical or moral implications of their work. This indicates a narrow focus on technical tasks without broader consideration of the consequences or ethical dimensions of their actions. The fact that these professionals are primarily concerned with technical aspects rather than questioning the higher purposes or ethical implications of their work supports the notion that they are intellectually subordinate. They are implicitly accepting the goals and values set by those in positions of power without critically examining or challenging them. The story serves as a concrete example that illustrates the broader argument regarding the intellectual and political subordination of professionals within certain educational and professional contexts. It highlights how individuals can become narrowly focused on their specific roles and tasks to the detriment of broader critical engagement with the societal implications of their work. Finally, we get to the last question, which is usually an intertextual question like this one here. Refer to the lyrics below and text 1, and then answer the question that follows. The following lyrics are from Pink Floyd's song entitled Another Brick in the Wall.
We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. No dark sarcasm in the classroom. Teacher, leave them kids alone. Hey! Teacher, leave them kids alone. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. All in all, you're just another brick in the wall.
1979 album entitled The Wall. We don't need no education, we don't need no thought control. It's very difficult to read these lyrics without singing them. No dark sarcasm in the classroom, teacher, leave them kids alone. Hey teacher, leave them kids alone. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. All in all, you're just another brick in the wall. And here is the actual question. Evaluate how the writer's views in text 1 align with Pink Floyd's lyrics. Refer to specific examples from text 1 and the lyrics above to support your response for 4 marks. And this is an evaluation question, so it's a pretty big deal. And if you look at the mark scheme, it also indicates how important the question actually is. So let's take a look at the answer then. Predictably, the length of your answer for the intertextual question is expected to be a bit drawn out because you're going to have to signpost and discuss each text individually and thoroughly, and then synthesize your response to the actual question thereafter. So here's the answer. In text 1, the writer critiques the current educational system, suggesting that universities often prioritize producing competent professionals over fostering individuals who can critically engage with the world and understand the forces that affect their freedom. He argues that this approach leads to students becoming intellectually and politically subordinate. Dewey describes an educated person as someone whose conduct is controlled by forces over which he has no command, and hence he lacks freedom. In the lyrics of Another Brick in the Wall, Pink Floyd also expresses skepticism towards traditional education. The lyrics reject the idea of thought control and criticize the authoritarian behavior of teachers, as seen in the lines like, "We don't need no education," and "Teacher, leave them kids alone." So you'll notice that for everything you say, it's always a good idea to quote to support your point or explanation. Now you've got to synthesize your answer and contextualize it in terms of the question. These lines reflect a sentiment of rebellion against the system's control over students' thoughts and actions, advocating for autonomy and freedom. Both texts, now that word both is a key word because now we understand that you've reached the synthesis part of your answer. Both text 1 and the lyrics of Another Brick in the Wall convey a message of challenging traditional educational norms and promoting the idea of education as a means of empowering individuals rather than suppressing them. They both emphasize the importance of critical thinking and autonomy in education, albeit through different mediums and expressions. For full marks, candidates must show the link between the writer's views and the lyrics and provide examples in support of their responses. And there you have it, people. We've covered an entire past paper together. And remember that before you turn in your paper or move on to the next question, proofreading is critical, all right? Proofreading each answer before moving on to the next question is ideal. However, if you can't afford the time, ensure that once you've answered all the questions in this section, you go back to proofread your answers for clarity, accuracy, and engagement with all parts of each question. Also, double check your numbering. And that's a wrap on comprehension questions. You're officially leveled up. Coming up next, summary writing for paper 1, how to cut the waffle and keep the marks. Now you're not going to want to miss this one. So guys, please help me grow my channel. Like this video if you've learned something new. Share it with a friend who panics at the word comprehension. Subscribe to English with Miss B so you never miss a tip that could boost your mark. You've got this and I've got your back. Until next time, read smart, write sharp, and remember, even exam questions have feelings, so be kind.
English with Miss B.